Well, the session is being anchored by Mr. Anurag Batra, Chairman and Editor-in-Chief of the Exchange 4 Media crew. So I will request the gentlemen to please join us for the opening session. Ladies and gentlemen, meanwhile, can we request you all to please give a big hand? Over to you all.
Too loud Punjabi, at least I'm counting you. Need a mic? Morning, it's an honor and privilege to be here. I'm lucky I'm talking to somebody who's a pioneer, and I personally look up to somebody. Mr. Purie, you heard Mr. Rajmohan talking about magazines, and we in the magazine publishing business and on the editorial side are facing a lot of challenges. Today he talked of content. Facebook and all social media platforms are creating content, whether that's credible, deep, good curated content or not. It's impacting our business model in terms of sales. You have been a pioneer, and you reinvented yourself and your group more than once. You entered the television space when nobody was looking at television. So you can see the future, so to say. You started magazines when the kind of magazines you brought out in terms of quality and editorial product, nobody was looking at it at that point. So the reason I'm saying that you're a pioneer, you're a futurist. What is the future for magazines is something that you're able to see and hence bet on as we speak.
Thank you. I wish I could see the future, but unfortunately I can't. I think only one thing we have an advantage of in India is, I always say, you can go to the future and come back, which means that whatever is happening overseas, I'm a great believer in globalization. If trends which happen abroad, sooner or later happen in other parts of the world. You can see it even outside media, who would have dreamt the kind of malls we have here in India, the growth of traffic, vehicles, pollution, all these are issues which get transmitted. And the same thing is happening in media. That is, what is happening overseas to magazines and to media in general, and especially with the internet, which is kind of borderless. It travels right across. So you can expect really huge change happening. And we're all experiencing it, so there's no question about we being insulated in any way. As far as magazines are concerned, I think one of the basic issues is that we have undersold magazines, underleveraged ourselves, right? I think magazines are a great product in terms of media consumption, which is, we have content, which Rajmohan spoke about. We have great curated content. We have audiences which are engaged. People make a discretionary purchase of a magazine. They have undivided attention when your person is reading a magazine. It's so different from, say, the internet, which is so infinite. Once you get onto the internet, it's like going into a buffet, and most people who go to a buffet end up overeating, and you at the end up with indigestion, right? Magazines are a meal which you order, which you want, and which you enjoy. And I think that these aspects have not been projected enough by magazine publishers, and the way the world has changed in terms of advertising agencies and so forth, who perhaps make less money on magazine advertising. We've not pushed ourselves far enough. We haven't done, magazines are so open to innovation in terms of physical product, that we can do all kinds of things in a magazine which you cannot do on the internet. You can have sound, you can have smell, you can have pop-ups. There are so many things which can catch a reader's attention, which an advertiser should appreciate, which I don't think is done. For whatever reason. I don't know. Everybody has their own reasons. But definitely we have bought into our narrative that magazines are dying, that people don't read magazines, etc., etc. I think part of it is also self-defeating. We have to talk up magazines. We have to aim, as Rajmohan said, has to do research, has to come up with things which suit us in terms of research designed for magazines, not research which is designed for newspapers which have a different pull. So I'm very optimistic. I mean, you attended FIP this time in London, and I came back and I told James also about it, that there was a great atmosphere of optimism. And I've attended FIP conferences before. There was like, you were facing execution. You know, people were like, fear on them and in their face. And this time in FIP, I just saw people finding solutions. You know, there's no one size fits all. People have found ways and are working hard to make their magazines work, because we have so many advantages. And we all know those in terms of dedicated audiences, loyalties, brand, integrity. All that is there, which is not there in this ocean of internet.
I agree with Mr. Purie that we in the fraternity have to do a better job at representing ourselves, both to readers and more importantly to advertisers. I couldn't agree more. Mr. Purie, you talk of resurrection of magazines, right? In the sense you said, you know, FIP was very upbeat on the future of magazines. You've used in the legacy brand of India Today, which is one of the possibly the strongest media brands in India, with trust and a certain quality of journalism, to build a TV network. You know, now your English news channel is called India Today. You have the India Today Conclave South in 4 days from now. So all the legacy publishers here are using their legacy brands, which are very strong. They have a trust amongst readers. They have a pull amongst advertisers to create brand extensions, to create digital products, to create events, to create podcasts. Now, that part of the revenue is becoming bigger than the core print advertising in some cases. So is it cannibalizing on the print advertising, or is it adding?
Oh, it's definitely adding. I don't think that they are in any way cannibalizing, because what is happening to print advertising is happening to print advertising. This is in fact expanding your revenue streams, and I think it's most essential that we do it. I think one of the magazine publishers, I think the young Heseltine said, we're not in the business of just content publishing, which has now become, we're in the business of audience engagement, which I think is a great definition. And audience engagement comes not only from reading, but from events, from podcasts, from videos, from whatever. But so you have to engage your audience in whichever way you can. And you have built a community in your magazine. That's what magazines do. And that is really what we have to capitalize on. And so these are all great opportunities which have been made available to us with the internet, in terms of you can have a different reach. You also then are able to create content in your events, which are then available digitally, and also for your magazines. So these are wonderful opportunities which have happened, and the more of it, the better it is for your brand.
You know, the era of celebrity editors, at least in the US, UK, has gone, because, you know, there's been cost cutting, and also younger leaders in editorial are coming up. The reason I'm asking this is, let's say 20 years back, in India Today, cover story could bring down a government, or, you know, today news television has taken that role, so to say. So what is the impact that magazines have editorially that helps them build a business, vis-a-vis 15, 20 years back?
You see, I don't think that there's any difference in terms of impact, because if you do a good story, today the possibilities of amplification of a story is huge. A magazine like recently, which has now become big controversy, started off with a story in Caravan magazine, right? Which is not the most well-known magazine in India, right? But is doing great journalistic work. But people have picked up the story, television has picked it up, other newspapers have picked it up, right? And the story is being amplified. So you do a good story.
This is the rating story you talk.
Huh?
The rating story.
No, the story on Judge Loya.
Okay.
Right, which has now become the big issue.
Right.
because of how he died and whatever. The question is that impact is not an issue.
Right.
You do a story today, the smallest of stories, if they're correct and people catch on to it, the amplification is huge. The impact is huge. That's what I keep telling my print journalists, who are the most, I'm sorry to say, most difficult people to change, right? In terms of going digital and being digitally savvy and making them tweet and making them get onto social media and so forth. That it is your audience. In the end, what does a journalist want? He wants his stories to be read.
Absolutely.
And the digital internet provides that amplification for him. And so this question of getting out of a weekly cycle or a fortnightly cycle and being able to write on a daily basis is a challenge for journalists. We are guys who write perspective. We'll take 1 week to look at it. Come on, the world has changed, right? You have to give your perspective in 20 minutes when people want to know. They don't want to know 1 week later.
Absolutely.
So these are challenges we face as journalists.
So does it require a new set of journalistic leaders? Younger?
Well, I don't say younger. You require journalists with a different mindset. People
Right.
who are willing to accept today's environment in terms of that the world has changed, that I have to be digital, I have to lead with the fact that digital is not my enemy, it's my friend, right? And I have to work with it and use it and make it a force multiplier than something which actually just suppresses me and depresses me.
Good. Now, what should be the role that advertisers should expect magazines to play in a digital-first environment? Though the money in digital is pretty low still, but the audiences are consuming content. So what are the role that you should be expecting from magazines as an advertiser? Which way? That's the part where we've been weak in convincing media planners, buyers, agencies.
Well, I mean, advertisers want audiences, right? So if you deliver the audiences they want in the kind of cost they want it, they don't really care how it happens. But as you were in FIP and our friend Juan Sinor came up with this dramatic announcement that forget about advertising on digital, right? It has to be content which people are willing to pay for. That's the future. Digital advertising, because the rates are so low, the inventory is so high. In the end, native advertising is another big kind of blurry area where people don't know where it's going, how much is credible, how much is not credible, how much money do you invest in it. Actually, what you'll end up is that you need to have content which people are willing to pay for in some form or the other, whether you give some free and then make it metered and so forth. In the end, maybe that is a solution, that you're not so dependent on advertising, that your content is so valuable that you're able to charge for it. I think that's the solution. And it's also happened on the physical side. As you've all seen, the price of magazines has gone up. Everybody's kind of almost doubled their price in the last 4 years, basically because advertising has slipped. And maybe the new model in magazines is smaller communities, but very well targeted audiences who are willing to pay the price for that content. Now, if they're willing to pay the price for the content, then maybe they'll do it on digitally too. So I think that these are possibilities of the future.
Mr. Purie, you made a very successful transition from being a magazine publisher to being a broadcaster. What were the rules you learned in magazine publishing which prepared you for that role, which you were able, of course, creating great content, engaging with audiences, building a brand, investing in content. But tell us some other things that helped you prepare for building the television business, which came from the magazine business that you started.
Well, there's no preparation actually. You just use business opportunities come up. The fact that at that time when television was growing in India, there was 70% advertising in print and 30% in TV, because TV was all government controlled, right? And abroad, it was 50-50. That's what I said, the future. You can see the future, right? And as TV opened up, we knew that advertising sooner or later would shift to to TV. So if you want to be in the game of media, then you had to get into TV in some way or the other. Now, it comes down to, if you're in news television, then it comes down to the same thing of managing journalists, managing creativity, and connecting with your audience. I've always kind of looked at it from the point of view of, from a viewer and from a reader, right? A lot of journalists in news and newspapers write for other journalists. And they write for the kind of people they meet, politicians and so forth. So everybody understands each other. But they don't necessarily write for the common viewer or the reader. And I always said that, you know, that's why things have to be explained, context has to be given, right? Background has to be there. Don't assume people know things.
And in their language.
And language, yes. In their language which they understand. So I think these are the things which apply to television too. Connect with your audience in the language they understand. Do the stories which they are useful to them, which are relevant to them, right? And not just for your peers, which is a danger people end up with.
Which is a magazine business or a magazine in India or in the US or UK that you look up to and said, that's the way a magazine business should be run?
I don't know the details, but when I look at the way Condé Nast does its business, they seem to invest a lot in content. I don't know how much money they make, right? But the magazines they produce are very good-looking magazines.
Lots of advertising.
They are also digitally very savvy, right? They spend money on content. And they invest in their content and in their people. And I think that they come out with big fat magazines, so they must be making a lot of money.
Yeah, so Condé Nast is one. What do you think of the recent acquisition of the Time magazine? The brands are very valuable. Though they had debts and they were financially weak, the brands were compelling. I mean, the Time magazine is still...
I don't know, maybe James knows more about this, but I'm not sure why Meredith bought Time. Maybe they bought it not for Time, but for other magazines, which are the, you know, the utility magazine, the celebrity magazines, and so forth. Time may be something which they may even shut, right? So I don't know. But I think that those magazines which are service magazines, which are magazines which have small communities, are maybe the ones which they're looking at. But one always has to look at, with these kind of publications, is how much of that information is already available on the net free. I think that that's one of the things which is a problem with specialized content. My other thing is that magazines should apply to newspapers, but actually more to magazines. Magazines should build domain expertise. Be the experts in your particular field. So people say, look, I want to read either this brand name of a person, right? I want to read Anurag Batra on media, and so on politics, regardless of where he is. People maybe are sometimes not so loyal to brands anymore as to bylines. Build domain expertise in every area which you can if you're running a general news magazine. So people have faith in, come to you when a thing happens in that particular area.
So Northeast, certain political...
Yeah, whatever it is.
Absolutely.
It could be economy, foreign affairs, people who people respect. And those are the people you should be in your stable.
Absolutely. Now there's a new normal. We are seeing a certain kind of political leadership. Good, bad, history.
Political, sorry?
We're seeing a certain kind of political leadership, heads of state, certain kind of, you've seen politicians for the last 50 years, you've seen political leadership for the last 50 years. It's changing, right? Would you agree to that? The kind of political leaders we have today, a little different than we had in the past.
Political leaders are changing, but politics is not changing. I sometimes look at what is happening in front of us, and I go back 20 years, I say, oh, this is the same story. It's the same kind of politics, whether it is in the parties, whether it is Kashmir, whether it is Ayodhya. Firstly, India is a great country where nothing gets solved, right? Nothing gets completed. Everything hangs, right? So the same stories keep coming up 10 years later, 15 years later. So politics hasn't changed. It's the same stuff happening, okay? We are probably more exposed to it because of news television is a big thing which has happened in India. Right? We're a democracy, we are a free press, which I think is an amazing thing, regardless of what anybody may say. The amount of freedom we have in the press here is amazing.
Yeah.
And this has held a spotlight to people who govern us. And it happens by the minute, right? There's not a smallest thing which just somebody can do, which just suddenly doesn't get into a 24-hour news cycle, right? And then that builds its own momentum.
So I was coming to my question was that for a moment, let's say if the political leadership is different, or in the way they look at media is a little different. I mean, they try and control the media. And Kali made a speech at the News Broadcast Award, and she said, this was 3 days after Trump banned the New York Times, Washington Post from the daily press briefings, and she said, she echoed the sentiment of India being relatively much more free press. But somebody countered that and said, why would any Indian government ban us, because we become cheerleaders for the government. So with government looking at media in a certain way, and becoming a large advertiser in almost all forms of media, what is the advice you have for media owners and editors? First of all, do you agree we have become, some parts of our media has become cheerleaders for people in power? Well,
you're a free press here. There are certain parts of the press which have become cheerleaders for the government. But I mean, the consumer has a choice. You know, he wants to look at that, read that, he does it. There are other people who are not that. So it's not that people have been, locked up for dissenting with the government. There are still stories which come out which are against the government. My feeling is that most sensible politicians realize that suppressing the consequences of suppressing the press are much more than any benefit they may get, right? And today, suppressing the press is a ridiculous exercise because of the internet, right? Stories just go, spread, you know. You may suppress it here, it'll pop up there, right? So that's a losing battle for them. I think most of them realize they may try and control the press in terms of spinning it, right? That happens in every country. They try to spin the stories, right? So somebody will do a press conference exactly at the time when somebody else is doing something else, so the coverage goes there, right? These are all spin tactics, which is part of the game.
You're saying the more it changes, the more it stays same in some way, in politics, in media, in the way we interact with the government. You're saying nothing has changed?
No. A lot has changed because of the fact that media and social media and 24-hour news television is there. There's a huge change in terms of the focus which is there on the news, which is the government, etc., are far more aware and conscious of the media. And that's why, you know, efforts are made to discredit the media or to say that, you know, they are, or in some way control them. So there's been a dramatic change in terms of the impact of media on society and on government.
I'll ask my last question before I bring in the audience. If you had to make 3 predictions for the magazine business over the next 3-5 years, what would those be?
It actually depends on what we do as a community, I think. I am a great believer that magazines as a media business is going to grow because I feel that this pendulum is going to swing towards loyalty towards trusted brands, quality content, and that people in some form will pay for it, right? We have gone to the other extreme with the kind of content which has come up. Today I read in the newspapers, Facebook is going to change its policy in terms of what it puts out, right? Even if Zuckerberg said, even if he loses revenue, he's going to put out stuff which is far more responsible in a way. Now, I don't know what that actually means, but they're thinking about it, right? So, so I have a great belief in the fact that people who produce content with integrity and are trusted as a brand will grow, right? Number 2, other revenue streams will open up for magazine content, right? Whether it's events, whether it's podcasts, chat bots, etc. We don't know what new technology is going to come on the horizon. So I'm, on the whole, very hopeful about magazines. I would not say magazines as media, people who are managing creative people, content, producing content. Now platforms of distribution can change, right?
Of course.
But you have the core. And if we sustain that core and develop it, we have a great future.
Fantastic. On that happy note, we'll end this conversation. Just to sum up what Mr. Purie said, one, the magazine publishers have to do a better job of representing themselves, both to readers and to advertisers. We're doing well if we build on the brands and the content that we have. And the next 3 years depends on how we take the lessons that come out of today's Indian Magazine Congress and from this session with Mr. Purie. It depends on how brave we are in embracing new forms of revenue and new forms of content consumption. Please give Mr. Purie a big round of applause. He's a pioneer in the business and continues to reinvent himself.